Here, and today we got a special treat because we're going to be showing you basically what's behind this engine. You know, we talked about it in about 3 different or 4 different articles in the magazine. It's modular design, and we're going to kind of talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of these engines and learn a little bit more about it. Once again, if you're out there, make sure you're following us right now on our Facebook or YouTube stream if you want to get all the camera angles and all that cool stuff happening. If you're on Instagram, we'll make the show as good as we can for you, but it's all based on how well Sam is feeling right now. And I don't know if we can even get a camera shot of him right now, but he was giving a hard time on our last roll because he was in the corner there with the staff of the camera there. But in any case, it should be a good one for this. So let's talk about this engine. Come on in here and you can take a look. You know, it's kind of interesting layout. It's a boxer engine, but this is not a factory one. This is a powder one.
Correct. So this motor, this short block at this point was done by a guy named Don Potter in Chula Vista. And this deal is actually still cast, and there's been some versions since some other guys have done that are billet. But the improvement on this one, not only is it more robust in terms of almost being kind of a top fuel block, he sets it up both wet or dry sump depending on what the customer wants. And you can pull the crank out of the top to check rod bearings, do any maintenance, which you normally would not be able to do with a Volkswagen case. And one of the things that we ran into early on when he first came out with the case is when you're doing a lot of naturally aspirated work on the dyno, you can pull his bottom sump piece off and change camshafts right on the dyno. So that's one of the things that makes it really nice.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So normally, as a boxer engine, we'd have this engine and it kind of splits apart in the center, and that's where the crankshaft goes. But on this one, we don't have that, huh? We've got it set up a little bit different.
So on this deal, one of the things that makes it nice is that we can pull the main caps out of the top, and at that point we can go ahead and check both rod bearings and main bearings. And because of the way this is done, they didn't end up putting the caps together with just being a 2-bolt main that a lot of you guys may be familiar with. It's actually got a cross 90-degree bolt, so they're 4-bolt mains.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so yeah, so actually the cross bolt comes in here and here. So this thing's pretty rigid once it's in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, the one thing that you're going to notice if you kind of guys, it's hard to see the scale of things when you're looking at them on camera, but this has got a very large main journal, and the reason being is if you guys pay attention, this thing's only got 3 main bearings. This is a 1930s design, and when you try to start putting some steam into them, they really show their deficiency. So one of the things that they went to is a much larger center main to make the crank robust.
Gotcha. Now, this crankshaft here, this is also not a stock piece. Which one is this? Who makes this one?
This one is a marine crank, and I ordered and spec'd this out through Potter. So Mario at Potter Machine, he does a lot of this stuff, so we essentially put together a package that worked with the weight per inch for our class. It's a 70mm crank. It's got a 2-inch 100 rod journal and a 2-inch 750 main all the way across.
Gotcha. So it's a pretty big journal there. But like you said, there's only 3 of them to help you out there on the mains.
Yeah, the center mains on these, typically going back 50+ years now, they've cracked out. So not only do the mains grow in size, but the radius ending up into the crank cheeks is a much bigger radius to strengthen the cranks up.
Yeah, as we're going through this explanation, if you guys have questions, make sure you're asking them, and we'll answer them as we take breaks in it. And right now, tell me a little bit about the camshaft. I understand this is a different camshaft placement, but there's also something funny about these engines and the camshaft.
Okay, so going back to this being a 1930s design, you guys got to bear with us on this because it was not designed to make power. I think they probably had in mind preventing them from making a lot of power in order to prevent them from building a lot of heat. These are air-cooled when they came from the factory. So one of the things about this camshaft is in this Potter design, it's been dropped from the center line of the crank in order to allow for a much larger throw when you start stroking these motors. But that's not the unique deal. When you guys got a chance to look at it, I think he zoomed in with the camera, because this motor is 180 degrees opposed and being a boxer motor, you can actually share cam lobes from one side of the motor to the other. So there's literally only, if you were to look at this, there's 4 cam lobes. You can get away with that because the motor firing order and it being an opposed motor, you can actually take advantage of that. Now, with that being said though, when you start to set up all your valve angles for the push rods that operate your rocker arms and valve train, one side of the motor is not at a good angle. One side lays out perfect, the other side's at an angle that we fight problems with.
And those push rods, they're not necessarily all that short either, are they?
No, I think these things are probably on average 5 inches longer than a normal deal.
Oh, these are about 5 inches longer than...
Well, like say if you have a small block Chevy, might be a 7-inch or somewhere thereabouts.
Okay.
These are actually 12-inch. We run them anywhere from like about 10 3/4 to 11, but these ended up being somewhere close to 12 on this motor.
And those are made out of chromoly. So one of the things we've been dealing with on the engine is you get a different camshaft as it gets warmer, right? Because you've got the block expanded at a certain rate, and you've got the push rod not expanding at that rate.
So guys, what we do on these, when we first assemble the motors and we're getting ready to run them on the dyno or take them down the track, when the motors are cold, we'll set the valve lash at 0. But when the motors run, it's expanded so much in temperature that you may end up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 thousandths valve lash. So I kind of kidded with Mike earlier, when you pick a cam out of the card catalog, you're actually almost choosing the one below that when the motor's heated up and running, because you're losing duration and you're actually losing lift too, because the motor's widened that much through thermal expansion.
Yeah, kind of, and that's one of the things we may or may not be trying as we kind of try new things. You know, the thing about an older platform engine like this is, you know, people have been doing it for so long, they found combinations that worked, you know, 30, 20, 10 years ago, and people, because it works, they don't really try new things a lot of times.
One thing that we're guilty of in the Volkswagen world, especially the air-cooled stuff, is you kind of rest on your laurels. You kind of know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. So guys don't expand out. They kind of just get stuck in a rut. You know, it's almost like we're buried in the 1960s or 70s from all the old early gas classes. So we're trying to get away from that.
Trying to get away from that, and that's why we're going to be trying out some new things. One of those new things we might be trying out is moving over to an aluminum push rod that would actually expand at the same rate. But of course, aluminum isn't as stiff, isn't as strong, so we have to make it even bigger. And lining up these things, there's only so much space in this thing. That's one of the challenges.
Yeah, it feels like there's 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag, for sure.
Now, the last time we were out, let's do this. We've got a video we want to roll, and this was the first time the car was out. First time it got down the track. We'd had it on the dyno before, but we had never even tuned the engine to get it to make the boost. But this was the first time we were out at Bandimere at the IDRC event. What can you tell us before we watch the video?
Okay, so understand one thing. Some of you guys are probably really familiar with building boost on a two-step. We had another system on the car, another injection system like years ago that we had no issues doing that. We were able to tune with it, but we had some injector driver problems on the motherboard, so it was time to abandon that system. And that's when Mike was gracious enough to bring me in, get me set up with the AEM system, and he's familiar with it. So when we end up in Bandimere, one of the things that with this car and a lot of these deals is that it has to get on the two-step, and when it's on the two-step, it actually has to build boost. And so one of the things there is that there's different strategies in the ECU that Mike's familiar with, and so that was our challenge all day. We only made 4 runs, I believe, on Sunday, and the vast majority of that was literally just trying to get the thing to boost enough to do a burnout, and then try and make the car launch. So what you're about to see is a launch, and from my perspective, it's horrible. It's the first time it's ever done it because we've had so many issues. These cars typically, when they're working right with the slipper clutch, making the power they do, they'll go in the low 1.2s on the 60 foot. This was like a 1.40. So again, it's 2/10 slow, but we're gaining ground.
So, the car, it finally got up there, finally moved out of the way. How did it feel?
Good. I mean, everything's working. So when we went to Bandimere, one of the things that this car has in it, it's got a slipper clutch. The chassis is an RLR chassis. It's Ron Loomis Racing. He does air-cooled Volkswagen racing. That's what he specializes in. He also makes a very nice dual-disc sintered iron slipper clutch for these. It not only protects the transmission from breaking axles and transmission parts, it really does equate to making a good 60-foot time. So when we ran the car down the track, Ron had the clutch and the bell housing set up for a torque value that was a little bit less than what this motor makes. But going in initially, we wanted to make sure the car got down the track and we could actually gain some data. So from this point, once the car went down the track, it built boost and it mowed right through the clutch, which was expected. So everything's a baby step, and that's kind of where we're at.
Gotcha, gotcha. And, you know, it was a pretty good event, you know, for the vehicle, getting it out there, and we got a lot of good data. Let's take a look a little bit more on the engine parts and some of the other challenges with this as we move along. We talked about the modular design of the engine. Let's talk about the cylinders. Can I pull any of these apart? Or
This one, I think the piston's out of right now. So
okay,
you probably
okay.
can look at that.
All right. So let's take a look at this one, and tell us a little bit about this cylinder.
Okay, so these are just an iron cylinder. These particular ones were actually done by Potter, who makes the long block. If you're interested in the long blocks, he makes cylinders for them also. The deal that we're doing right now with DSPORT, and it's been really kind of a good journey for me, is in the past, a lot of our air-cooled cylinders, by the way these are put together, they're under a compression that you won't normally have with a normal block on, say, an inline, V8, an inline 4, inline 6. So one of the debates that's gone on for years in our community is making the cylinders round. Do we use torque plates when we actually do the final honing? Do we not? That's one thing we're going down that road with Mike and DSPORT and his expertise right now, is trying to get these cylinders as round as we can, because this platform's been done for so many years. What we're looking for now are small increments, and I really believe that when our new torque plated cylinders that are round, and the modern piston that we've got from Molly and the ring packages that they come with, I really think we can seal this thing up, keep the compression gases out of the case, and pushing the crankshaft down and making the car go faster.
Yeah, I think so too. We can look at, I don't know if we have one of the old pistons here, but you can see how the engine was tuned, how it was running, and not a bad color at all in the piston there. And was this the one that got the heat and actually lifted the head, or was it a different one?
I would have to flip over that cylinder to take a look, because it actually shows evidence on the top of the cylinder. Yes, okay, so
okay,
that's
so
the one. Yeah. So that actually hurt itself. It lifted the head, and we did torch some aluminum on the cylinder head seating surface for the cylinder, but the piston tends to look pretty good. So.
Yeah, the piston looks good. If you ever are investigating a piston and damage, if the top ring or any of the rings don't move freely, you've got a problem. So throw it away at that point. But if it does move freely and you don't see anything else there, we're going to put this back in this thing after we get everything machined and ready to go back together. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting situation. One of the things you can do with this engine being modular is you can go to a different connecting rod length, you can go to a different cylinder length, and kind of make the engine get actually 2 inches wider than it was from the factory if you want. So it's kind of like having an engine with whatever kind of a deck height you want in it, and you can really go to some extreme rod to stroke ratios. With right now we have a pretty extreme rod to stroke ratio.
We do. This motor, one of the reasons that happened was this motor initially, when I put it together and built the header and the intake system for the intercoolers and things coming from the turbo with the throttle body, the motor was a certain width. So when we went ahead and changed the crank from an 86 millimeter down to a 70 in order to make the car come into weight for the class, I wanted to concentrate on making sure I didn't have to redo everything on the intake side and also the header. So we went with a 70 millimeter crank. We de-stroked the motor, and in order to keep the width right, the rod became ridiculously long. So this rod, I think it's a 6,280 or 6,300 rod, and ratio-wise, at the top of my head, I don't recall.
Yeah, I think it's something like a 2.2, which is kind of off the map.
Yeah.
But it's working pretty well, and it's we're probably going to keep it there for now as we kind of do some more development. Right now, one of the biggest challenges has got to be the cylinder heads. So tell us a little bit about what we're working with here, because I'm seeing a lot of weld on here. What's going on with that?
Okay, so these cylinder heads are an Autocraft head. They've been around since probably the mid-70s in terms of being manufactured. These heads and a case that goes along with it were done for sprint racing, circle track racing, and they were alcohol motors and naturally aspirated initially. So these are kind of a lightweight, air-cooled casting, and as a result, the mass isn't there. A lot of guys, when they went turbo here years ago, they would end up taking and filling every void they could with weld to create a lot more mass in the head, and also plug some places where you might want to port into to get your flow numbers up on the flow bench. So these ones here are ancient. These are probably literally 25-year-old castings. They were a used motor that I put to use for this car. And so what we're fighting now is, I think probably the Rockwell's not as hard as they initially were, and it's time to switch over to something else. We're going to continue to maintenance these for more dyno sessions and maybe another couple test sessions while we put together another set. And then since we've started this program, Mike also went out and got a billet for a set of billet heads, so maybe sometime in the future we'll be working on those.
Yeah, I hope so. And if not, another option might be Autocraft Engines has updated the design
Yes.
too. You know, this is actually what this head kind of started out as before it had some of the modifications on it. This is a little bit later revision, but you know, you can see that there's still areas here where there's not material and that would need to be added and kind of bring in extra material to kind of put enough mass there so that when this thing gets all that cylinder pressure and moves around, it just doesn't crack, which was the problem we were you know, fighting with this. One of the issues we had initially as we got the car together and started on the dyno was we couldn't get consistent boost. Well, we couldn't get consistent boost because as the engine got warmer, the cracks got bigger.
Yeah, we actually had a hole in one of the exhaust ports, and I could hear it in the car.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of the challenges that you know we've been facing with, but it is interesting. You know, a lot of the valve train too. That's the other area we might be looking at. It's pretty dang big. It's pretty beefy. The spring rate's got to be through the roof.
It is. I think this spring was put together with this package for roller profile cams for naturally aspirated stuff. What's in the motor right now is a lot lazier lifter speed, so it's probably not necessary. I think these on the seat are at 255 pounds plus, and they're probably somewhere close of maybe 600 pounds over the nose. This camshaft goes to 750 thousandths lift. So when I don't know millimeter wise what we're looking at there, but it's getting up there.
19 millimeter, something like that. Yeah.
This has a question. Are these cylinder heads from USAC Midget VW engines?
Yes. Yeah, so this is an Autocraft head, and they were done a lot. And again, I'm 50 some years old. I don't want to give that away, but in the same respect, in terms of this stuff, I'm young. A lot of this stuff was going on, I think, in the mid to late 70s, and I wasn't familiar with it. I grew up in the Volkswagen street scene, and things weren't at this level unless you were a serious racer.
Now, years back, you were was the Pro Stock class? Is that what you
Yes.
guys call it?
Mhm.
So you were kind of, I didn't know you were that much of a celebrity until we kind of went to Colorado and saw some of the VW guys out there. You were driving that for a while?
Mm-hmm. So essentially what we've got in the Volkswagen deal is that we have our own circuit that we go with. It's such an odd platform. We were sort of run out of NHRA. They were real successful in the 70s in what's considered the gas classes or some of the modified compact deals. Because of the fact that these take so many different products other than the mainstream V8 deal, we sort of didn't fit the rules and we kind of got run out. So we've got our own circuit, and we've made some classes that go along with that. So the Pro Stock deal that Mike had mentioned is an all-tube chassis, typically metal body with some fiberglass panels on it, but it's tube chassis, ladder barred cars with coilovers, and that class currently is 9 pounds per cubic inch. So everything's based on weight per inch on the motors, and they're just race gasoline with carburetors. Those cars typically right now, some of the guys are running between 940s and 960s with them, and they weigh, I want to say, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,350 pounds.
Wow. Now your car is a lot heavier than that.
It is. This car's a tank in comparison. So this is a mild steel chassis. I probably should have done a chromoly one like my previous Pro Stock car, but weight wasn't an issue. This car with me in it, I want to say right now, probably weighs 1865, somewhere in that neighborhood.
1865. And the engine itself is about 2.3 liters?
2.3 liters, like 140 inches.
Okay. And so by the rules that used to be, and that was the other thing we were talking about the other day, is that standard, you know, for this class, it's kind of all over the map because there hasn't been really a rule revision update for a number of years, and the organizations that have the class that this car fits into, it's not that regular of a thing, right?
Correct. We're down now, I think, to probably 4 races a year that are being promoted, and as a result, some of the interest fall off. I mean, this class, in order to put this together, it's a pricey deal. So the car turnout's pretty low. We struggle with that. And the other thing that happens is you'll end up with one of the guys that I'm competing against, I would like to compete against, that has the record, Dave Perkins. His car has run 760s in Sacramento, and what happens is he'll go out and lay down a pass, and I think it really discourages some guys because they feel they can never get to that point. It takes a lot of support. I've got Mike here with me, and that really goes a long way. So
yeah, and I learned more about Dave's setup and stuff, and he's done some pretty innovative stuff. You know, kind of really pushing that rule book and really, you know, looking for opportunities to get these things out there. And I think one of the things that's a little bit different with how we're kind of approaching it is all that data acquisition that we're getting, and that's been fun to kind of learn things. And you know, you think, you know, what are we going to learn, you know, that's going to help out a water-cooled car or this or anything else, you know, from an air-cooled engine. But there's a lot to be learned there. I mean, air-cooled, if you think about it, when guys are out there drag racing and they concrete fill their block and they don't have anything going through it, it's air cooled.
Sure.
So a lot of that goes, hand in hand out there in kind of comparing the two. Do we got any other questions out there? All right. So guys, I want to thank you so much. Make sure you get out there and vote today. I think Ron Loomis is supposed to join us later in the week, so we're going to have him down here talk some more. And you'll be here tomorrow, maybe if we have some more time, or if you guys want, we can get him back on here and get some more questions. And thank you guys so much. Once again, get out there and vote, and we're going to see y'all guys tomorrow.